I really
Well,
wish it
John,
didn't say that.
20 page fucking short story. What do you think?
You know, what the fuck, Craig? This is some bullshit, you know? I'm only allowed to read, like, 2 pages a day. It's in my
Yeah,
poetry contract.
yeah.
That's why I do what I do and not what you, and, like, all you other psychopaths who write fiction do. Read these damn dense, biblical fucking, heavyweight stories.
A
Or
20-page paper on one day in the life of a fucking 14-year-old kid, right? No, is he 14 or is he 17?
17.
He's 17, that's right. He kind of has like the naivete of a 14-year-old.
Yeah, it
Uh,
makes sense because he's like I'm assuming this is closely related to Saul Bellow himself. So he's probably he's depicted as like an academic, book smart kid who gets shit for it. And, that kind of personality, which is kind of the personality that I had growing up. And I know a lot of other people. I don't know if you had it or maybe you had it and you came out of it, but like you kind of get a little sheltered and you're like you are naive. You become more naive because you're like I think you either sequester yourself in a book or in what other hobby you have, and stay away from people is because people just give you shit, and that's definitely what this kid is. He gets shit from his brother. He gets shit from his father. He gets
shit
even
from random bartenders on
the
the
random
street.
bartender, even if it's like funny shit, he's getting shit left and right from people just because of how well, in that situation, how he looked and his whole countenance, and he's getting shit
That's
from the world.
that's
He's
kind of
no
being a
wonder.
teenager, though, isn't it? It's just like getting shit from everybody.
Yeah, there definitely is
you
a
know,
point when the world looks at you different, and you're like a cute fucking 10, 11, 12-year old, and then all of a sudden, man, you're a fucking piece of shit teenager, and everybody hates you, and you're like, what the fuck? And then you get all weird and angry. Your parents don't know what the fuck to do. So they forgot what it was like, I guess, to go through it.
it's tough. Have you ever? I know you've taught college, which is basically 18-year-olds. Have you ever? You never taught high school, though, right?
Oh, thank fucking God.
Dude, there's like this pervasive sarcastic nature to teenagers. Like everything is irony, everything is like a farce. I think we've talked about that. We talked about that a little bit with the Destructors. Um, just how everything is a facade to a teenager, and they're always trying to break that down and figure out the truth. They trust nothing, that's told to them, and they're always trying to see like what's beneath the veil or underneath the veil. It's tough, man. It's fucking teaching high school is tough as fuck, dude. I'd choose a middle school any day of the fucking week over high school again. Especially like a private high school full of fucking rich fucking teenagers.
You know,
Um,
it is somewhat like if it didn't come with all the angst, it is kind of admirable to look at life that way. Like, what's the truth? Like constantly looking for the truth, and being disappointed because everybody's lying to you and to themselves about what life is because nobody really knows. Um,
well,
yeah,
that's part of what I think this story's about. What a stranger, what a stranger this kid is to himself, and how little he really understands about the world around him, and about I mean, part of I really feel like the reason um, that this kid is such. I mean, the reason for that first paragraph, which is so beautiful, it's so important to understanding his story, is that this kid went out of his way to not try and understand things because he's grieving. You know,
is he's what?
he's grieving. He's grieving his mom who's about
Right.
to die. But he doesn't realize that he's grieving. He doesn't realize what grief is. And he's also incredibly alone throughout the story. You notice that? Like,
Yeah.
he comments on his vast social like standing and his social circle, but in the forward action of the piece, the only person that relates to him at all, genuinely tries to like talk to him like a human being, is this fucking bartender at a speakeasy. You know,
Yeah, and that's probably the why when you're reading it, you're like, even though he's just constantly busting his balls, you're like, oh, this is kind of wholesome, and like, there's like a tension releasing, and within the character a little bit, and like things, I don't know, something's changing in him. Um,
well, he's finally learning about the world. He's finally learning about himself because somebody's finally there to um, explain part of it to him. You know, he reads these like real like, so this kid, who I don't think is named, um,
Louis,
Louis. All right,
Louis, which is a terrible
basically
name
just
for me
Saul
to read.
Bellow.
Yeah, it's Saul Bellow. This isn't Louis C.K. here. All right.
Fairly rich kid in comparison to the people around him. Um, you know, he's walking around in raccoon jackets. Uh, he's got nice clothes. He actually does have a girlfriend,
Yeah.
which is important as we move along. And he works as a delivery boy for a flower shop. And this is one day in the life of him. His mom is dying of something. We're not entirely sure what, but it sounds to me like cancer. More likely than not, it's lung cancer or something. She can't speak. She can't sit up. She's just like slowly dying in the house.
Yeah, every night the family just sits around and waits for her to die.
Yeah.
It's fucking horrible.
It's horrible, man. And your brain does strange things to you as you're going through like this kind of grief. Um, anyways, he delivered this. He has one delivery that day, and it's to a mother who is having a funeral for her daughter. And as the kid walks in, Louis, he finds the girl in the coffin, and the mother finds him staring at her, like looking over her.
Mm-hmm.
And basically just pays him to leave, and it's interesting also that she has this giant spread of food all around the house.
Right, there was like a party. There's like a party going on. It's like cutting through
Right.
like everybody's getting drunk. Um, and she's alone with her dead kid in this room.
Right, but the kid's looking at the food and he's like, I saw. So there's
Yeah,
another part of this kid that's really lustful for pleasure, really lustful for food. In fact, on his way home from school, he stops and eats some cheese and some bread at his house.
yeah.
Uh,
What do you make of like this weird, like in that first couple page, or yeah, I guess that's on the third page, but like in that first page, he's describing this situation, like how desperate people were back in the Depression era, and they were shooting birds. They'd wait for the cops to roll by, shoot some birds, and off the telephone wires, and collect them, and scurry back in the house. And he says this had nothing to do with me. I mentioned it merely because it happened. Um, so that obviously that like foreshadows a little bit of what happens to him with the
right.
person who steals all of his clothes. It's like that same kind of desperation depicted. But the way he writes that, and then like I saw, kind of remind like it's almost like he's mocking the way he's telling this story. Maybe I'm
Well,
reading a little
he's
bit too
trying to
much
say
into it, but like
you
this is
know,
what happened, and now this is what happened. This is what I saw. Like over and over again with no, like, he's not really like reasoning it at all. He's just kind of depicting one moment to the next, like in the moment, which is also ties into the way, the whole point of the story and like the big philosophical angle that is taken at the very beginning, and like the routine of life, how it seems like a disc just spinning around, but it's really a vortex to the end of it. um I don't know, man. Like that's kind of like, it seems like inconsequential on your first read through, but on your second read through, you're like, this feels like he meant, like, everything ties together. Every great story we read, it feels like any one little element, and this is a big story where, conceivably you could just take out something. You should be able to just take something out, but no, you can't, because everything is what it is, and it needs to be there, and it just adds to the narrative. But this is just a master. You're talking about Saul fucking Bellow. He he
Yeah,
knows what he, especially in this late in the game, 1990.
yeah.
Like, he knows what the fuck he's doing, and it's great.
Everything adds to the complexity of the story.
Yeah, and Saul Bellow is like a very verbose writer too. Like, that's
Yeah,
another, like, you would think that, like, all these little asides and whatnot, it just adds to the density and doesn't really distract from the narrative, because it's, at the end of the day, it's told, and it's a very simple plot, it's a very simple movement, but you're really just trying to get close to this character and understand them, and he goes to depths to kind of understand this person's mind and how it works. Um, while also, like, it's also complicated by the frame of the story, which is, he's talking to his own kid, then,
right.
the narrator, telling him about who he was as a kid. Um,
In fact, in theory, it almost sounds like he's become his mother. You know,
yeah, yeah, something to remember me by.
my mom couldn't tell me the things that I had to hear from
So
her
I'm gonna tell you.
on the edge of her passing. So this
And,
is what I have to give you. I don't have this great estate. I don't have anything else, but I
right,
can give you this before I pass. And this is like so much of life where
and yeah, and he, like, realizes through telling the story that the whole point of his life was to report, to talk about the city he grew up in, to talk about his life,
right, which
or
at the
whatever.
time before what happens, he spends his time ignoring the city. You know, he spends his time in really deeply philosophical books,
Right.
um,
And
ignoring the things going on around him because he couldn't stand to face them because he thought that they were all just so much of the same thing. He didn't want to look at the
that,
intricate nuances of life. And really, I mean, he's really just a haughty, selfish kid at the beginning of the story. Truthfully,
that's the big change. It goes back to what you're talking about
right?
with teenagers. You kind of are disgusted by the world, so you shut it out until something fucking happens to you. And if you're like Saul Bellow, or, most artists, I think, are like this, when something happens to you, you feel compelled to either talk about it or just to create something that shows how you feel and who you are. Because, if because the feeling is so, whether it be love or grief or whatever, it's just the first time it really hits you, it's so great. It feels so meaningful. Even if it doesn't really have a meaning in the grand scheme of things, the fact that you're experiencing it, like, prescribes the meaning to it. And I think that's the realization that the author has, or not the author, the narrator of the story has, when he's telling the story. um because when I first read it, like, we talked about it a little bit last week, but, like, it is kind of like, it feels aimless until the
Yeah,
end, until it starts to come together, middle two thirds of the way in the ending. Like, it really tightens up, and everything becomes clear, or the feeling becomes clear that he's trying to impart. The meaning, it's still kind of nebulous, and, like, I don't know, like, I don't even know how I would explain the meaning of this story to you. I mean, I think it is somewhere in, and I'm rambling, so feel free to jump in. It is somewhere in the beginning, and that metaphor for life that he brings up a couple times in the story about the vortex. But how do you You know, he's really showing that because it is like the story shows that a little bit, how life could feel mundane, like the day to day, and then it just
Right.
suddenly swallows you up.
Well, you realize that it's not mundane, that your actions do have consequences, and that things can change. Um, Things change for this narrator drastically for the worse. Um, so he goes after the
I don't know. I don't know, man. It was kind of a happy ending for me. I don't know how
I
somebody
mean,
getting
it's
punched in the
happy.
face is a happy ending, but it kind of, he made it a happy ending. You know,
It's happy in the sense that
it's wonderful.
his mom doesn't die. It's not. It's almost a comedy, honestly.
Yeah, it
It's like a
is.
really sad comedy, but I wouldn't go so far as to call it a tragedy. There's definitely some comedic elements to it. So
Yeah, it's tragic.
after he goes from the funeral, he wants to go visit his brother-in-law, right? Who's a dentist and is conducting some weird experiments in his
Well,
office.
the impetus for going there was like seeing the girl, like he was shaken without realizing it because of the grief like you talked about that he's going through with his mom, even though she's not dead yet. Like he's starting to grieve, and like seeing that dead body changed him. He didn't have to go to that dentist's office. He went there for comfort
Right.
because that was the only person who we never even see, by the way, who was nice to him. You know.
And see,
Um,
and not, but he was nice in a way that the strip club is nice to me, like, or
well,
was nice to me. Like,
you take what you can get.
right. I mean, that's part of being a teenager too. Is you find your comforts where you can. You find them in drugs. You find them in degenerates. We were talking about that right before we started this podcast. But there isn't a surplus of comforts for most teenagers. Most teenagers aren't these like beautiful, presidents of the school, overachievers that everybody just lords and loves over. A lot of us come from broken families, fucked up households, and then even this kid who his household is more or less intact. Um, in a way, he kind of comes from a really fucked up family. I mean, his dad
Dude, totally.
is in the throes of grieving for his wife, and any little infraction from any of his kids, and he beats the shit out of them. His
Brothers basically in a
brothers,
mafia.
yeah, one of his brothers is in the mob, and is um, thinks thinks that the narrator is an idiot. There's nobody he can really go to, and Stephanie, his girlfriend, as far as I can tell, honestly, is just somebody to fool around with. She wasn't somebody that he could quote unquote talk to about the
No.
stuff, and he never talked about the stuff in the book to anyone.
Well,
So
he remember there's that moment where he tried to like talk all that hoity-toity shit that he's reading about, and she's like, "Nah, when you die, you die." He's talking about matter, like the world of matter versus the world of not, like being a part of it, like life and death, basically.
right, she doesn't get it.
She's like, "Nah, you die, you die. It's whatever. Shut the fuck up." Also, we're 17. you know,
Yeah,
Chill the fuck out.
I
So in a
mean,
way, I
it's a
like that.
lonely age to be,
Yeah,
honestly.
it's lonely when you're this kind of person, I think, especially.
I don't know, man. I think it's lonely for everybody at that age. It's like
Well,
you're overprotected in certain respects, but the world is on your shoulders. You feel like an adult and you feel like a kid at the same time. Um,
yeah, everybody's lonely. You can't forget that.
I mean,
No matter who
you're
you
right
are.
about that. There is no escaping it, fortunately. But this kid in particular is lonely. I don't know, man. When you get married, you have somebody to talk to finally, right? So the father is lonely because he can't talk to his wife anymore. But um, but at least you had somebody to talk to. You know,
Yeah.
it's hard to put into words like what it's like before you ever had that person, like who you were and how you felt about the world before you met the people that you had to meet to understand. Like you're lonely even from yourself. You know what I mean? Like because you don't know yourself at this age, and that's part of why I think everything that happens is he's finally trying to understand. You know, maybe I'm somebody like my brother or my brother-in-law. But by the way, his brother-in-law just fucked this girl, um, and left her there. And
Oh,
I mean, that was the sense I got, anyways. I mean, John, she's butt naked and you could smell sex in the room. You
okay,
know,
so his brother-in-law, dentist, shares an office with this scientist, doctor guy who conducts experiments. Who, according to his brother-in-law, are just ways for him to get off, right? Like
right?
he takes people off the street and examines something or another. He does an experiment and measures something while they're fucking. And according to his brother-in-law, this is just he just does it for kicks. The science be damned. He's just using that as an excuse, so it's not weird. So the reason why she's there or who she's with is unclear. Like the other doctor isn't even there. Like he's conceivably nearby, according to the narrator. But in essence, nobody's there except for them. And what she's doing or who she just slept with is unclear. Was unclear to me. Um,
It's left
but
kind of vague,
it
but
could
there
be.
is
It
check
could be his
in the air.
brother-in-law for sure.
It could have been his brother-in-law. It could have been. I mean, the brother-in-law is not at the office either. You know,
Right. Yeah. Who knows what the
so she's
hell's.
just there, butt naked, laying
Dude,
down
this
in his lab.
This is a nightmare. Like halfway through the story, it just becomes a straight up like narrative nightmare that dream. You can call it a dream too. Like it's not like a straight up nightmare. It's just like all this like weird kind of dream-like things are happening, right? Like the
There's like a
fact
dream logic to it. To it
like it's
all. Yeah.
reasoned why there's a naked woman just randomly in this room, right? So it makes sense because it's a dream. Like everything in a dream makes sense. So yeah, of course there would be a naked woman in this office because he conducted experiments while people were fucking and blah blah blah. But like so it has like a logic to it, but as it goes on, and you'll keep going with this the plot summary and everything, but it starts to get weirder and fucking weirder, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, wouldn't you feel like you were in a dream if you just walked into a room and you saw a naked woman lying down?
Yeah,
You
and she
know,
didn't immediately run out the room.
yeah, she was just totally perfectly fine with
She
being
was like,
naked.
"Yes, please help me unhook these wires that are for some reason hooked up to my breasts and body." And he's just like, "Yes, of course," and he fucks it up and hooks himself on. That was
I
actually a
mean,
metaphor. He's like, as I was unhooking her, I was being hooked by her into
right?
her mentally. Uh, which is fucking beautiful. There's so many, man. Saul Bellow can write like a motherfucker, man. His
Yeah,
description, like that's what struck me when I first read Herzog, and I mimicked that. Remember, I went through a
yep,
phase where it's just describing people's faces and shit. Like
yeah, portraiture,
he did that so much in
Herzog.
Herzog, and that was written like in the '60s, right? Like this is him developed where it's not just he's like obsessed with people's faces, which he could still do, but like just a basic description of things is so articulate and like detailed. It's almost too much, but it's never quite too much. He knows when to back off and when to keep the shit rolling, Um,
Yeah,
which is also something to learn from this. Like how, like because when you first start writing, you like, oh, description's easy. I could just jump in and describe something, and then you realize it's not, and then you realize that if you do it too much, you fucked up because nobody wants to hear that shit, and it has to have a point. So he knows
right.
when to dip in and when to dip out, which is like, you know, it's crazy. It's fucking beautiful. And sometimes purely poetic. Fuck, let's find one.
You got to think of description as an element of setting, and setting is important, but and so is characterization.
Mm-hmm.
But what keeps the reader going is the plot. Where what happens next? What happens next? How do they
So,
react?
So
What
to
happens
yeah
next? How do they
to
react?
to just give an example, this is after he found her and he's helping her get dressed. She started with her bra several times, lowering her breast into the cups. And when her arms went backward to fasten the snaps, she bent far forward, as if she were passing under a low bow. Like, damn. The cells of my body were like bees, drunker and drunker on sexual honey. I expected that this will change the figure of grandfather Louis. So he's like in the description, he's going forward into the future. I expect this will change how you look at me as your grandpa. The old man remembered that
Yeah, he
as
steps
this
out
or
of the
that.
narrative to comment on the reality of the dramatic presence, where he's in a
Right.
bed probably somewhere or wherever he is writing this.
So he has these two beautiful, like, or at least one very beautiful simile, and like just kind of effortless within the plot movement, and also recognizing who he's talking to, so you're not losing it, and how ridiculous it might sound to them when he says something as absurd as sexual honey, you know, like it. So he gets away with it, basically. Is what I'm saying. He gets away with it. I mean, one
Listen,
through the
look,
beautiful action and like lowering her back as though to avoid a low like branch, you know. It's
yeah.
to this other. It's just a crazy little paragraph that he just comes out of nowhere.
Listen
Wonderful.
to the next one. But I couldn't be blind to the woman's behavior even now. It was very broad. She laid it on. I saw her face and profile, and although it was turned downward, there was no mistaking her smile. To use an expression from the 30s, she was giving me the works. She
Mm-hmm.
knew I was about to fall on my face. She buttoned every small button with deliberate slowness, and her blouse had at least 20 such buttons. Yet she was still bare from the waist down. Though we were so minor, she and I, a schoolboy and a floozy, we had such major instruments to play. Like, God damn. God
Wonderful.
damn.
The motherfucker
It's
can
like
write.
watching a violinist tune a violin, and
Yeah,
just
effortless.
launch into Ave Maria or something, um purely out of the dark, or just totally unexpected, but so professional. It's obviously somebody who's been writing his whole life and reading his whole life. He's obviously somebody that was put on this earth to write. There's a patient methodicalness to it. Um,
Right.
there's which, by the way, is the exact opposite of Herzog. Herzog is just fucking machine gun firing, fucking energy.
Yeah.
This is 30 years after that, so he's learned a lot of patience. Um,
I
and
think you
I could
just
keep
get
going.
patient too, like in your demeanor and how you look at the world,
And
you know.
yeah, absolutely. And if
And
we
he's
were to go further, whatever happened would never get beyond this room. It would be between the two of us, and nobody would ever hear of it. Still, Marchek, the pseudo experimenter, was probably biding his time in the next room, an old family doctor. He must have been embarrassed and angry, and at any moment, moreover, my brother in law, Philip, might come back. So he's thinking about, what if we get caught here?
and as a
Um,
that narrator is establishing the tension of the moment, you know, like this is
right.
the moment where if anything were gonna happen, it would have happened. Like if she was gonna fuck him, she would have just did it right then and there, you know.
Yeah.
And this is obviously absurd, but that's what's going through his mind as like a horny kid, that would
Of
ever
course.
happen. And that's the hook. By the time he gets to that point, he's following her to the end of wherever this is going to go, you know, and obviously it goes where it goes, and unfortunately for him, but that movement from those three paragraphs is just absurd, you know. That's description. It's description with everything. There's nothing left out. There's
Right.
tension. There's plot. There's perspective. He doesn't forget the reader who is this imagined, his son. Everything's in it. Beautiful.
Well,
Just
wasn't
beautiful.
it during Saul Bellows when you were discovering him that you started writing letters, or is that a little bit before?
That was it, man. When I read Herzog,
Right.
that was
Herzog
it.
Herzog was constantly writing letters.
Yep.
But
And
because you were reading that, you started writing letters to the reader as well.
Yes.
And that was an important part of um of your writing career, or whatever you want to call it, your pathway discovering writing, and mine too, because I was reading all of them. That we really started as writers to finally start thinking about the reader. You know, who is the reader? You know, what would I say? Like, I don't know. It's funny to think, but writing, when you first start, the reader is the last person on your mind,
Yeah, it's all
right?
about you. It's all
Yeah,
about you.
I'm writing this for me. Fuck the reader.
Right, and that's why think about when the time you're talking about, it's basically a year in, really a year and a half. We could call it two, but not really. It was like a year in, and so like you come out of that, you're hopefully coming out of like a very self-indulgent stage. I don't know if that ever really leaves you because you got to be a little self-indulgent in order to like
Absolutely.
write the way we write, especially, the way we want to read the stuff that we want to read. And but yeah, like you have, like at that point it's just you realize how intimate what you're doing is, because you're not writing. And even if you are thinking about your audience, like you don't want to think about your audience. You want to that's for like maybe a revision down the line. Maybe you think about that, but when you're writing a draft, you're really writing to one person, whoever the
Absolutely.
fuck is gonna read your shit. That one
Yeah.
on one, it could be 20 years from now, or it could be, you might give it to your friend and like, hey, I wrote you this letter. That's why I thought of letters, because letters are like the most intimate thing you could write to somebody. Like texts are
Yes.
fucking basically letters. That's intimacy. um one person. That's what I was thinking about. Even if it was this abstract idea of a reader, or it could be my granddad, or it could be your brother, or whoever, your girlfriend, or this girl you're dating. It could be anybody. But if it was just one person, it automatically lended a poem or a story or whatever a certain level of intimacy, and hopefully knowing that it would be one person, you would be ultimately sincere and honest in whatever you were saying. Um, so it worked, and it works because of those reasons. Like that's what you have to do. I think like it's so hard to write to a group, because then you have to like be a politician basically.
Right.
You have to think about what multiple people, what their wants and desires are for what you're saying, and blah blah blah. That's terrible, but that's how you're taught to write sometimes, especially in grad school. You're taught that you're writing to a moment. You're not even writing to an audience. You're writing to a moment. How the fuck do you write to a moment? You know?
Yeah.
Like it's sure, some brilliant people have done it, and there are examples out there. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but of people doing these like extraordinary feats, and writing to a moment. But maybe they're only writing to a moment after the fact. Like I guess Maya Angelou is the best example of this. But she's really writing out of her own experience and her own body and to her own people, and like, and
Yes.
probably to a very specific person if we're getting down to it. Like, because the person also has to be important to you. Like, to me back then, a reader was really important because I wanted people to read my shit, and so
Yes.
the reader was the most important thing. But it could also be like your family, a family member. It needed to be, because that would give you energy. Like knowing that there was that one person on the other end. You weren't just alone. You weren't masturbating. There's another person there with you. They just hadn't discovered it yet. But
Damn. You make me want to start writing letters to my parents.
we all
Yeah.
should. I mean, our parents are going to die soon. What are we doing?
Right.
And we're only
Right.
going to see them so many times before, if we're moved out of the house, you're only going to see them so many more, a handful of times before that happens. So fucking write them a letter, man. Get the story. Get the stories you want out of them now. Fuck.
Yeah. Well, anyways, this short story is basically a letter to his grandson.
Yep.
And
This is a writer at the end of his career. I mean, he lives another 15 years after this, but
yeah, but this is base. I mean, this is basically his last great work. I think. I think he knew that.
It kind of reminds me of like John Lennon just writing. Obviously, he was still young when he got murdered, but he basically said, "Fuck all this extravagance. Let's just give me a guitar,
Yeah.
and I'll write some words down and sing them." Like
Yeah.
this is as simple as a narrative kind of can get. Like he's saying, I'm gonna write a story to someone, and I'm just gonna one thing after the next. Here's what happens in my own way, of course, in my brilliant way of doing it, as Saul Bellow can with description and um, the way the plot moves and the constant like reasoning and reflection and all this stuff that makes it so dense. It's but yeah, it's great. Like, yeah, why not? Why not do that? You're great at that. Just focusing on the things you're great at doing. You know.
And it might end up being your best piece, ironically, which I felt like this was. Um, the
It's
point of
great.
this story is I'm finally going to see these people that I passed by in life and treat them like they're apparitions. I'm probably going to see them and try to understand them. Then that's a point I get. There's other points too. I'm going to discover something about my own sexuality. I'm going to understand something about my plight in the world. That I'm not some Don Juan, type of motherfucker who's just going to pick some girl up off the street and immediately go fuck her. And that I do come from privilege, that I have things that a lot of people around me would kill to get. By the way, he's lucky she didn't, like, while he was sitting there naked, she didn't just walk in and stab him to death.
Right.
Um,
Right.
that all she did was steal his clothes, uh, and run out of the fucking room. Because he's not a guy like his brother or the bartender. He isn't that guy.
Right. And that's the realization he has, right, with the
Yeah,
bartender. Like he realizes the bartender is the guy that would just it would have ended there. Like it probably wouldn't even made it to that room. It would have ended right when he saw her the first time. He would have made the
right. He
move
would
and
just shoved it
whatever
in
happened
and
would have happened.
fucked her and left.
Or if more likely in this situation, since he was planning on robbing him, she would have rejected and ran or try to run away or get away and say no, fuck you or whatever.
She'd have looked at that bartender and sized him up and understood that the best course of action was to give him a wide berth. Because if this guy caught me, he would probably kill me.
Right, right. That's true. That's true.
And that's
It
just
wouldn't.
the pecking order of life. There are people out there that I had to come to the same conclusion at the strip club. That I'm not my father, and my father wasn't Anthony or Chris.
If
One of these
only
guys.
we all knew that about you back then, I wouldn't have worried so much. Remember back, remember when
Well, I realize there are
Angie was
people like
like,
me that do survive, but they don't. They don't arrive there. They usually end up being like um, line cooks or something in the back, or passing out flyers for the rest. They end up being guys like Eddie, or Nick
right,
at the very most. And it's like, dude, it's even best course scenario, like being Chris, like that's still a miserable fucking existence. You know what I mean? Um,
well, imagine or if Nick like dying of cancer, being surrounded by these types of people.
right,
Uh, no wonder he was, he just partied the rest of his days away. Like, what else did he have? What else could he
right,
do? Was he gonna have a deep conversation with somebody at the strip club about life and death? I don't know, man. Maybe if he talked to Angel, maybe. But he was also dying. It's only the people who are dying, I guess, or us who were
yeah,
dying in our own way back then.
right.
Like as these angsty 20-year-old kids, which is what they were trying to, that's what Angel was trying to tell us, like, hey, look, you're not me. You're not gonna
Yeah.
die, you're not dying, like live your fucking life, look how absurd it all is and enjoy it, because one day you will be like me, you idiot.
Well, the kid comes to the same conclusion, doesn't he? he realized the bartender sets him straight. So this girl takes him from the doctor's office to some apartment somewhere, some like hotel room. Tells him to strip naked, leave his clothes on the chair, and like a dupe, he does. And she goes into the bathroom. And when she comes out, fully dressed, she takes his clothes and throws it out into the um out of the window and leaves him butt ass naked in the bed. And the only clothes that he has is a dress in the room, an old dirty fucking dress. And he has no money and no way to get home. And it's fucking freezing outside. It's cold enough to kill him. This is Chicago. We're talking about in the winter time. Um, this is the time before cell phones, and there's nobody to talk. The only thing that he could do is go to the police, which would cause his family embarrassments. You have to understand this. Once again, this kid, in this instance, his wealth works against him. You know, if you were to just go home
Right.
at this point, uh, you would cause your family like um dishonor and whatever. You know, it'd be a public embarrassment. He'd be Hunter Biden essentially. um,
Yikes.
you know, well, a lot of people in the Biden family are in it, but
Thank God he didn't have a cell phone. He would have posted it
right,
on Instagram.
yeah. I
Here's my
mean,
dick, everybody.
I mean, at some level, you have to admire Hunter Biden, but you have to admire somebody who'd get into these situations and laugh about it. But that's the other problem about being 17 is at 17 you wouldn't laugh about it. You know, it'd be this horrifying thing. Um,
Right.
and so the only place he can think to go to where his brother-in-law might be is the speakeasy. And uh, the speakeasy bartender gives him a chore to do, which is to deliver one of the drunks to his house. And when he's delivered, so he's the story in a way reflects itself a lot. It's almost like these dark mirrors of as a lot of great stories are, right? Dark mirrors of things that have already happened or are about to happen, like the girl dead in the funeral foreshadows not only his mom being dead, but also the girl that's going to be naked um, in the room opposite the dentist office. The walk that he gives the girl to the hotel mirrors the walk that he gives the drunk back to his house. The food that's at the house when all the daughters are around and they're trying to get him to eat, he rejects. Whereas earlier on, when he was looking at all the ham and the bread at the funeral, at the apartment that was having the funeral, he was full of lust. Finally, he's learned, you know, I don't need to eat from poor people. I don't need to take food out of their mouths. I don't need to take. I'm not one of the takers of the world, you know.
Right. And
And
that works perfectly in the whirlpool vortex. Like it's not going around and around, it's going around and you're kind of like seeing it over and over from a different lens.
right,
And it
yeah.
gets worse and darker
Well, it gets
and
worse and it gets
crazier.
better. It gets better for he becomes a man, ironically, while wearing a dress and going home. um,
That's the tagline.
you know, I mean,
The
it's
boy who becomes a man while wearing the dress.
yeah. I
Or
mean,
the
isn't but don't you think like part of becoming a man is learning to laugh at yourself and learning to laugh at life and the absurdity of life, um,
yes. Yes.
and learning that um, selfishness is not a virtue, and that it's better to be selfless than selfish. I think is a kind of uh, a kind of masculine um, path. So he ascends in a way, and he ascends to the point where he's not even scared to go home and get beaten up by his dad. You know, he goes home and he's grateful that his dad beats him up because it means that his mom hasn't died. She didn't die this day. He doesn't have to live with that on his conscience for the rest of his life.
God, man, how beautiful was that moment? I
Gorgeous.
loved it, man. It's just so plain. Like, what's for somebody who's so verbose and like is crazy with description. All he says is his fist was ready. I took off my tam and woolen beret, and when he hit me on the head, the blow filled me with gratitude. If my mother had already died, he would have braced me instead. Fucking lovely.
Well, they're all gone now, and I've made my preparations. I haven't left a large estate, and this is why I've written this memoir, a sort of addition to your legacy. I've made my preparations, meaning I'm ready to die. You know, I become my mother in this instance. And you now are his son's probably about the same age he was when this story was happening. And so he finally somebody finally in this world gave a 17-year-old some good advice. You know, don't try to pick up hookers.
That's the moral of this story. Amongst the other ones, right? that's
I
the
mean,
that's
it's
that's a low down dirty advice right there.
yeah,
don't
that's a
don't pick
glib
up
way of
hookers.
putting it. I think the more honest advice is like, um, you know, to understand something about yourself and understand that actions have consequences.
Right. I mean, at the
Violent
end of the
delights
day,
have violent ends.
that's what this story is. It's just one thing leading to the next, one action leading to the next consequence.
That's
Like,
what all stories are, man.
yeah,
All
yeah,
stories are all good stories are about characters making decisions and the consequences of those decisions. You know, and the meaning of those consequences, and that's it. You know, take any story you want. You can even take it. You can even look at great poems. Um, Stranger, right? I love this fucking poem. Teach it every semester. Um, I courted a woman that I knew didn't love me, and after she left me, all I could think about was how um, now she was spending time with other men, and um, and all I can think about is all the only solace I have for myself is how wrong we were for each other. You know, first love, John. You know what I mean?
yep.
Um, Rewind. You know, um, after I convinced this person to have an abortion, all I wish I could do right now is rewind history, rewind everything, and all I'm seeing is my own life being rewound. You know, and the decisions that led us here. I don't just have to be yours either.
Yeah, please. Leave me out of this. uh,
Uh, it's a great one by Sharon Olds. You love My Father Speaks to Me from the Dead. You know, my father died, and all I can think about is what he would tell me now, um, or what he is telling me now as this thing that lives inside my brain. You know, what would he tell me if he wasn't constrained by time or space or social norms? What would he tell me if he had the power to tell me the truth. You know, outside of the realms of death.
That's what that poem is, man. It's just pure truth, pure id,
Right.
channeled through her father. That's crazy. That poem's crazy. Poem's crazy.
And it's fucking amazing. In this story, what are the consequences of thinking that um my sexual prowess and my burgeoning manhood um are way stronger and way more sexually daring than they actually are, or that they account for something more than they do. What are the consequences for not knowing anything about um, who I am in the world? By the way, this story has a cousin in the form of that John Updike story. Remember the A&P?
Yeah.
Same basic plot, really. Young man tries to court girl. In that case, the social classes are reversed by some daring, stupid feat that gets him nowhere, and suffers the consequences for it. Right?
Right.
So John Updike didn't grow up rich like Saul Bellow did. So, okay, he's a grocery store clerk. Rich girls come in, they act like they own the fucking place. They choose my line to get into, and I put way more emphasis on that decision than is actually there. And I quit my job because I think by that act of martyrdom, I'll have earned a discussion or something. I'll have earned something from these women. Whereas this story, okay, I'm going to walk this strange naked person home.
Yeah.
And think that because I helped her, she'll fuck me. you know,
Teenager, man. Teenager.
I
Both
mean,
pretty fucking stupid.
young men are, though. That's the point.
Yeah.
Young men and women are. And denying that is like one of the most painful things, I think.
Hey, how about this one?
Go ahead.
If I love her, she'll leave her husband.
Right. We're back to a straight.
If I love her enough, she'll change. Or if I love him
Or
enough,
even if she
he'll
does,
change.
like yeah, she'll leave. The funny thing was she did leave her husband. It still didn't matter. Right, affairs. I mean, you can write about those. It's a
All right.
torment of being young.
All right. So I think the thing that makes this story like more interesting than just like coming of age is like the weird I'm also dying. Here's my coming of age story as I'm dying. And there's like some weird like that allows him to do that weird description thing that we delved into, like pop out of the description to like address the reader and how like weird it is that he's writing this. Kind of gives it some sort of freshness or perspective. I don't know.
Right.
Which is, it's obviously, I don't know, like I was gonna say hard to do, but like it's just something you do or you don't, like if you want to tell that story, you either can or you can't, and I guess what I'm saying
Well, that's one of the
is,
benefits of being 75, right? Is
right, and Saul Bellow, I guess.
I start thinking about the reason why I tell these stories. If I was going to tell this story, who would I tell it to, and why would I tell it? All right, I tell it to my grandson. Why? Or my Right. It's his grandson, isn't it? Or is it his son?
His son.
Right. So I tell it to my son. Why? Because I'm dying. And this is my last chance to tell the truth about something that has never been told before. By the way, we saw this move used, at least in some variation, in the Laraka story, Cosmos. You know, my father always talked about the last time he saw Secretariat and how we were some of the last people to see him alive, but he never told this story. You know, let me tell a
Right.
story about who my father really was. Now that he's finally gone, and now that I can finally do that.
Right. Thinking about, well, that's like a real basic writing lesson right there. Just thinking about why you're talking about what you're talking about, why you're talking about it today. What's going on with you. It adds a certain layer of complexity that makes
I mean,
the
you
story
can't hold
more,
anything
more
back,
interesting.
including the reason of why the story is being told if it's being told in first person. You can hold those reasons back if it's being told in third, because a third person story can just exist, you know,
Right.
out there in the void without explanation. And it's not that every first person narrator necessarily goes into that. You know, like we're never told like in Cathedral, you know, I got to tell about this story about this blind man because he's dead now, or or whatever.
Well, that makes sense because that person's like very close minded. He wouldn't be thinking about it. He's just
Right,
telling the story from the perspective of somebody who just got their mind blown.
right,
So it works.
yep. That's an interesting point. Um,
Isn't it also in present tense? No, well,
no, it's
oh,
in bad.
it's tricky because he does go into way back story, but okay, yeah, it's in past tense. Um, it's just so close. That's a story we should talk about eventually. Um, again and again and again.
I mean, it's so good, man.
It's the best. It's the shit.
And
It's
by
a,
the way, that's a great story to talk about in relation to this one too, because the narrator in that story is a lot older than the narrator in this one. Um, and he didn't have his aha moments. He didn't have his moments of clarity until he was in his 30s or whatever, you know? And it makes you wonder, like, maybe his adolescence was just that prolonged. Um,
yeah, I was thinking about that earlier when you're talking about like becoming an adult or becoming a man, like like having that moment of humility, and how many people don't really get that. Like some people will be confronted by it and fucking go off the deep end. Like maybe our brothers are kind of like that. I always thought like making it through your 20s is a big deal because you have to like confront who you are as a person and like either accept it or deny
or
it,
rejected or something.
or like, and that's probably what the narrator, that's the type of person the narrator was in Cathedral, was somebody who denied that his ability to have that kind of intimacy with anybody, including his wife. um and it's sad to think about that people like that exist, and when you see it, you kind of know, right? Like when you meet somebody that's like that. Because we've been there, we've been that person, and sometimes I'm still that person. I'm not like, I think I'm getting better, but it's not just a switch either that turns on and off. Like we like to think about it like that because it's how it happens in stories, but you get caught in ruts, and you forget. And that's part of life, like coming back and realizing that it's all kind of it's all a little crazy what we're going through. That's the reason why we do art and like read stories, is to remind ourselves. And that's what happens in this story early on too. He's like reminded of, like, I don't want to like boil it down and just say, oh, we're all gonna die, and like, oh, life's kind of an absurd thing if you really think about it. But that feeling is not said, but it's shown when he sees the girl, and it like kind of sees the dead girl, the girl in the coffin, and then he makes the decision, right, to go to see his brother-in-law at the dentist's office. Um, it's yeah, man, that's the whole point of this shit, dude. I think this is a great story. And this happens again and again in this story, by the way.
Maybe the brother-in-law, like in a Raymond Carver story, the brother-in-law would have like delivered something poignant to the kid.
No, he would have touched his face. He would have like,
Yeah, touch his
here,
face. You know, let's draw the girl in the coffin. You know?
let's draw her together. Just close your eyes. Let me put my hand on the.
But Saul Bellow's like, man, that's not how my life was. Though my life was like, I found a prostitute there, and I tried to take her home.
Hey, we love Saul Bellow, you know, just the same.
No, he's great, fucking great. He's really verbose. But my point is, like, you know, you bring up an interesting point. It wasn't, and I don't know if that stuff would mean anything to a teenager, really. Like, the thing about John Updike and Saul Bellow, and the point that they're saying with those two stories is the only thing that really gets through to a young man is total, complete humiliation. Like, that's what changes your worldview. It's just like utter, devastating, life-shattering humiliation.
Right.
I have to get home. I just got robbed by a prostitute, and I have to get home in the winter in a fucking dress during the Depression when people are out fucking shooting pigeons. I might freeze to death. I might get shot. If the cops see me, they'll probably arrest me. God knows what my dad's gonna do when he finds me.
It's like one
the
humiliation.
the only person who really gives him any comfort, the closest thing he gets to a blind man in that story is this like rapist fucking bartender at a speakeasy.
All right.
You know,
He's not a rapist.
He said, like, he's not a rapist per se, but he said, like, if she'd have done that to me, I'd have just threw her on the bed and shoved it in. Like, I don't know how you fucking read that, John.
No. That's I believe it's presented a different way. This is the narrator imagining the type of person the bartender is. I don't know if
he says that. He says, let me find the fucking line. Because the bartender is making fun of him. Okay, go to the line where it says, only you're not a man, you've got a dress on. It looks like it, doesn't it? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. It's just that's the kids. All right.
it doesn't matter, man.
It does matter. Like the druggist. Okay, so what happened to you? You got taken by a team of pros. She set you up. You were the mark. Jewish fellows aren't supposed to keep company with those bad cunts. But when you get out of your house into the world, you want some action like anybody else. So, and where did you dig up that dress with the big fancy roses? I guess you were standing with your sticker sticking out and you were lucky to find anything. Was she a good looker? Uh, Oh, wait, no, it's a couple lines before that. Who took you? A woman? Up in her room. When I undressed, she grabbed my things and threw them out the window.
This is reflection, by the way. That's what I
No,
mean.
it's in dialogue.
What page are you on?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm on the 9th page. The line of dialogue who repeated, who took you? A woman? He's talking to the bartender. The kid said, Louis says, up in her room when I undressed, she grabbed my things and threw them out the window. Left you naked so you wouldn't chase her. I would have grabbed her and threw her on the bed. I bet you didn't even get it in.
Ugh. All right, there it is.
I would have grabbed her and threw her on the bed. She's gonna rob me. I'm gonna stick it in her. All right. Now, again, like, you know, say whatever you want about the bartender. He's giving the kids some practical advice about the world, you know? And by the way, listen, John, I know you don't want to hear this. Nobody else wants to hear it, but prostitutes get raped all the time. In fact, there was some great advice that I got when I went to jail. It's like, dude, listen to me. You want to be in here, you're going to get fucked in the ass. All right? Just acknowledge it, accept it.
Great advice.
That's what life on the streets is. In fact, you know who gives this later advice is in American Pastoral, where the Swede is talking to his brother about his daughter living out in the streets after she committed acts of terrorism. And he somehow found out from his daughter that she'd been raped a couple times. And his brother's like, well, what the fuck did you think was going to go on out there? You know, what do you think goes on out in the world to homeless people and to prostitutes and to people that are walking the streets? You think like good things are happening to them? You know, like that's part of the world. And that's why I said, by the way, he's lucky that when he was naked in that bed, she didn't come over and just stab him to death. We're talking about Chicago, you know? We're talking about the seedy parts of Chicago. Happens all the fucking time, even now. Prostitutes kill Johns. Johns kill prostitutes. Pimps kill prostitutes. Pimps kill Johns. Johns kill pimps. You know? The bloody, fucking disgusting, cyclical thing. But it's very much part of the world. Dostoevsky knew it, you know? Beggar boy at Christ's Christmas tree. This society won't even save a starving 6-year-old from freezing to death. You think they give a fuck about a prostitute? You know? Or some 17-year-old jerk-off kid who's running around trying to get laid in the wrong part of town? Like, this world eats you up and spits you out. And if you want to survive it, doing the things that you're doing, you got to get fucking crazy strong.
Right.
Like that bartender was.
You gotta be a fucking psychopath.
Yeah, you have to be the rapist, is what he's saying. So it's his first taste with fascism. But that's what a lot of, that's the animal kingdom. If there's ever been more poignant arguments for how fascism works, all humans have to do is turn to the animal kingdom, where the strongest is the one who gets laid, and the strongest is the one who eats those who are weaker than them. All right, and that law governs a lot of society even now, even all over this world. And so is real, honest advice. And yeah, it's the opposite of the blind man. The blind man's like, it's not all fascism. There is love in this world. There is love even between strangers, even between men. There is love. And it's best not to forget that. It's best not to let this world daunt you too much in your pursuit of that. And so he learns a little bit about himself there. But that's not to say that, there isn't evil out there. It's not to say that there aren't kids out there that will destroy your house just because they can. Or people who will leave you on the side of the road dead just to save their daughters or whatever. We live in a world of both spectrums. And, where you end up largely depends on luck of the fucking draw. He could have gone in there and seen the blind man in the room, and he could have had to walk him home. The guy could have given him some speech or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that wasn't going to happen in this story. Not with Saul Bellow. But
Saul Bellow wasn't that guy.
Nah. All right, man. What else you got? You got anything else, man? Got anything else? I got nothing left for this story. I love it though. It's a I joked about it in the beginning.
It's a 20-page long poem, man.
Yeah, it's might as well be, It's I just love how, like you said, it's Chicago. It's dark, it's grimy. It's the depression. It's not just Chicago. It's Chicago in the depression, and it's like the worst part of Chicago. And like this kid who's being confronted by it, he's a little bit more well off than everybody else, but he's still there. And I love how
he still has problems, and his problems still get him into trouble. But
and even in like this there's still beauty like to be found in it. Even in the violence of with his father, there was beauty to be found in it because it meant his mother wasn't dead that night. Even with this fucking mafioso piece of shit bartender, there's comfort. He gives him a flannel to wear, so he doesn't die when he's walking his drunk home.
I mean,
Even even in
there's
the
light even in the dark.
even with the drunk and going to his family, there's love there for this guy who can't even make his daughter's dinner. The 10-year-old lifting a cast iron with both hands to make food. I mean, it's beautiful. It's just fucking beautiful. Even, even with the person who there's something to admire in the person who wrongs him with just her just beautiful, how beautiful she is to him in that moment before she takes him, takes everything he owns. The way it's written, just it's imbued in all of that. So it like with all great stories, while it recognizes how shitty things are, it still shows like Cathedral showed us how beautiful the world could still be. And that's why I like this story a lot. And I don't give a fuck if it was 100 pages. It'd be even better. Although I might not read it.
Dude, I'm reading Of Human Bondage by Somerset Maugham, and it's basically a story of his whole life. 600 fucking and like 90 pages long. You start from when he's 9 years old, all the way up into his late 20s, I think, or early 30s, and every fucking line of it is gorgeous, written so true, so painful. My point being, don't don't let the length of the work disparage you, John. There's a lot of great works out there, 1,000 pages long, man.
Right.
You know, especially if you're falling out of lust with poetry. Like,
Well, I think the lure with poems is that you can get there in one poem sometimes, but I think it's
right.
more like stories just are more consistent um, in the way they hit for me anyway. I think that's just generally true because writing a 1-page poem or a 10-page poem that hits like a you know 30,000 word story or a novel or whatever is so rare. But
It's
anyway,
tough. Part of
it's
the art, though, is
yeah.
it's finding access to those stories. Just quick access to them. And
All
I
right,
mean,
man.
hey, anyways, you got to
Yeah.
go. I got to go. You pick what we do next. All right, whatever you
All
want to
right.
do.
All
All right,
right.
buddy.
All right, man. Talk to you
Peace.
later. Bye.